What's up, patrons? It's Adi again from Gate 7 International. And for our latest series of Patreon interviews, we have a very good and old friend of the show. We have Paul Taylor from The Athletic, also known as Tails. He covers Nottingham Forest. You might have seen him on the show before. We've talked a couple of times about things going on between Nottingham Forest and Olympiacos, who share the same owner, sister clubs in that respect. Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm very well. How are you?
Can't complain too much. And if I do, no one listens anyway. So it is what it is.
It's good to complain sometimes anyway, isn't it?
Exactly. So things have been heating up over there, especially in the race to avoid relegation. A lot of stuff going on that we're going to talk about very briefly. But before we get started, I wanted to start with your background. I know previously, probably more than a year ago, we actually had a little talk about your background in football and how you got started as a journalist. But if you don't mind repeating some of that, just to give some of our newer users who've never heard from you before, kind of your background. How did you get started in football? And then how did you get started in your career as a journalist?
Well, my interest in football actually began by watching Notts County across the river from Nottingham Forest. I don't think people would mind me saying that because there's no real well, there is a rivalry between Forest and Notts County, but it's kind of a curious one. And Notts County fans really dislike Forest, and Forest really are kind of apathetic and probably quite like to see Notts County doing well. So it's kind of a one-way thing. Forest are focused on Derby and Leicester, and they're their real rivalries, particularly Derby. They absolutely despise Derby, and that goes back a lot of years. But when it comes to Notts County, even though they're really, 100 yards apart across a river, there's no real rivalry there. They haven't played each other in years. So, yeah, I grew up as a Notts County fan, used to go with my granddad. It was at that time they were under Neil Warnock, and they went from the third division in England right up into what is now the Premier League. And I thought that was going to be the way forever, that they would suddenly always be competing at that level. And as we've found out in recent years, that's not quite the case. They've been right down to the fifth tier in England, and have only just come back up. But they're doing all right now, so it's okay.
That's actually incredible. I don't remember that. I don't remember the local rivalry bit. I feel like I should have realized it, that Notts County and I were local, but I never put two and two together. That's very interesting. So tell us then a little bit how you made your way into sports journalism, or specifically football journalism.
I was really lucky. I was only 18. Just come out of college, didn't really know what I wanted to do with life, and I spotted an advert in the local paper, the Evening Post, as it was called then, for a really local level journalist to go and cover basically church fetes, local events, really, really low level stuff. They wanted kids from the local area to go and cover their local area very specifically. So I applied for that, and I didn't get it. I didn't get the job, but they decided to do the same thing with sports journalists, where they wanted somebody to cover the real low level, like Sunday League football, local cricket, real low level stuff, but stuff that people were interested in. People who played wanted to see their name in the paper. So I applied for that, and I got it. And that's where I started. I started right at the bottom, picking up faxes, delivering papers to the important people at the paper, just doing the kind of low level menial stuff until I got the opportunity to cover a few football clubs. I started off with Mansfield Town, then Notts County, and then a few years down the line was persuaded to stop covering Notts County and cover Nottingham Forest instead, which was almost 20 years ago now. So I'm starting to feel a bit old on that front.
Wow, so that's actually incredible. So you literally worked your way all the way from the bottom to the top.
Yeah, no,
that's incredible stuff.
I did a spell when I was training, I did a spell in a couple of years as a news reporter as well, which was really interesting. So I covered court. I got to interview Reggie Cray, which was really bizarre. And the things and the people that you met doing that were really interesting as well. So it's been an interesting journey.
So now, how did you make the step to The Athletic? Everyone knows The Athletic. We all read. I'm pretty sure everybody in my Patreon community reads what comes out of The Athletic. All of us do. So how did that transition happen? Did you join The Athletic when it was first getting started? I remember when it first started. I was I think in high school. when they were
Yeah.
first getting the wheels rolling on that. But how did you get involved with the
Yeah,
Athletic?
I think it's 4 years ago now, and basically got a phone call asking if I'd be interested in being part of the project. They wanted to employ journalists who had an affinity with football clubs, because they wanted to cover every football club in the Premier League and quite a few outside the Premier League as well. That was the plan to do. I think most of the Championship as well at the start, and that's where it all began. They rang me and asked if I'd be interested, and I'd been at the Post for 25 years, so it was a little bit hard to say goodbye to that, because I felt a real affinity and connection to the place. But when I first started at the Post, they had a circulation of probably close to 150,000. It was massive. It was huge. 7 or 8 editions of the paper every day. People were selling it on street corners in the city centre. Everybody knew the Evening Post, and by the time it got to 4 or 5 years ago, the picture had changed a little bit. It's just the way journalism's gone. Papers don't sell so much. Papers, they're viewed as old-fashioned by the modern generation, I think, and going somewhere like the Athletic, which was a new way of sort of sustaining media and sustaining a way for people who are interested in reading about football, hopefully with quality journalism and a bit of a more insightful way of doing it than the kind of tabloid approach, which is fine as well. It's just a different way of doing things. It intrigued me, and I was really pleased to join the Athletics. It's been a fun ride for the last 4 years.
And an audience of millions as well.
Yeah, we're doing well. Obviously started in America, where they built up really solid foundations, but since we've been taken over by the New York Times in the last few years, it's only increased our audience as well. So, for example, the piece about Forest in the last few days, and the whole refereeing situation and the VAR situation, and the statement that Forest put out on social media after the game at the weekend really sort of captured the imagination, and I think was picked up in America as well. So it's a new way of introducing Premier League football and Nottingham Forest as well to a new audience in America, hopefully.
Yeah, it definitely is. I still remember when the Athletic was just getting started. The idea was, I listened to the interview with one of the founders, and the idea was they were trying to get what in the United States we call them beat writers. It started with American football, baseball, hockey, and they wanted beat writers that lived in the city, that were part of the culture and the community there, to be the ones that were writing about different sports. And it just blew up because you felt the passion from the writers. They weren't just writing about a team, they were writing about their team. And everyone loved it, and then it just blew up from there. And now, of course, it's all over the place in various countries in the world, which is incredible. Still working on them. Need them to come to Greece too.
Well, you never know. It might expand there at some point. The thing you say about having passion for clubs, that is a really big part of it, I think, because I know I started this whole conversation off by talking about how I'm a Notts County fan, but a lot of my friends who are Notts County fans give me constant stick because they say I've turned and I've become a Forest fan. And whilst I probably wouldn't admit that to them, it probably is true. After 20 years of covering a football club, you do get a real affinity for the place and really want to see them do well. And watching them win promotion a couple of years ago was, fantastic. Professionally and personally, it was a really good experience, having covered the club for so long and waited for them to get back into the Premier League. It was really great to see them get there. And I'm probably one of few people in the city who can say that they're probably a Notts County fan and a Nottingham Forest fan, but hopefully both clubs can be successful, and then I'll be a happy man.
Without kind of touching on topics we've already approached with you in the past, I wanted to ask you something I know I didn't ask you before, and it's about whether or not your relationship with Nottingham Forest changed when you went from the Evening Post to the Athletic. Did your relationship with the club change when you moved from one to the other? Has it changed, or has it remained the same?
Do you know what? The biggest change wasn't me, my personal change of circumstances. I don't think that really altered much at all, because I built a relationship with the club over the years anyway. The biggest change was when Forest got promoted to the Premier League, because the whole media landscape, once you become a Premier League club, changes on a level that even I wasn't prepared for. I'm not naive. I didn't think that there wasn't going to immediately be a massively bigger spotlight on the club. I knew there would be, but the scale of it is remarkable. Like the amount of interviews that the players and the manager were all required to do from people all around the world, all the rights holders, sitting and talking to the media staff. The number of rights holders they have is incredible, from all corners of the globe, and they have to probably do 15, 20 interviews every week with the selected player, the manager. So immediately, naturally, their time is more precious. So you have a bit less access to players. The managers' time pressures are suddenly greater. So he's a little bit more impatient in press conferences, whereas previously, Steve Cooper in the Championship would sit and talk to you for ages in a press conference and talk to you afterwards, and you'd have a great chat. Nowadays, Nuno, I think Nuno has a different relationship with the press anyway, but he can be in and out in 12, 13 minutes and everything's done and dusted. There's no messing around with Nuno. He's straight in and out. But I think that is as much to do with circumstances, his own personality, because he's got to go off and do another dozen interviews before he can get back to his actual job of being a football manager.
Right. That's actually very interesting insight, because I don't think that's something that people consider. So in a way, it's the exposure means more eyes are on you as well, because you're covering Nottingham Forest. More people are interested in Nottingham Forest, but then at the same time, you have less access. It makes your life more difficult because you're now competing with everybody else who's also trying to come in now and cover a team that you have been covering from the start before they got famous in recent times, so to speak, right?
Do you know what? It probably would have made more difference to me in my previous job at the Post, where you lived more on a diet of player interviews and manager interviews, and you had to get a player after every game and things like that. They expected more player interviews and more player interaction. And now at the Athletic, the way we do things is slightly more different. We'll probably do 3 or 4, maybe 5 really considered, thought out pieces every week, which is doesn't necessarily involve your standard player interviews about how they were unlucky, or they've got to try harder, or it's been more in depth than that. But the kind of football cliche interviews that you get sometimes after football matches. It's just the way things happen. We don't necessarily do those things as much. We try and give something that's a bit different and a bit more insightful. So thankfully, not being able to speak to a player every Thursday is not the end of the world. But it's just an example of how the landscape changes when you get to become a Premier League club, and it really does. The intensity and the scrutiny on every Premier League club is remarkable. I was at Luton for the game the other week, and I sometimes wonder how teams like that cope with it, because Luton, with respect, are a far smaller club than Forest. Their facilities are very different, and all of a sudden they find themselves in the Premier League, and they've got to have there's equipment requirements, there's press room requirements, they've got to have room for dozens and dozens of cameras and dozens of interview rooms. It must be so difficult for them to turn, again respectfully, a place like Kenilworth Road into somewhere that can host Premier League football matches and all that comes with it.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. But I will say, regarding the writing for The Athletic, personally, and I know probably the majority of my Patreon audience, my co-hosts, and most of us that follow the show would think the same thing. I prefer because I have not read a single person on The Athletic that I haven't found to be very insightful, analytical, and just does the research. For me, a lot of modern journalists are very much, you brought up a tabloid, and I find that to be the case with a lot of modern journalists I read. They focus more on shock value for certain things, player interviews, but the individuals I enjoyed reading, and it's no secret why The Athletic is loved by everybody, is because of that. People want that insight, which you always get from whatever, which is why I love to read it all the time, and why all of us do. So I think that's 100% right. And I would rather, personally, even if it means you don't get a player interview here or there, because I don't know, the more I get involved with football stuff, especially on the Olympiacos side, the more I realize, like, what are the players telling me? You know what I mean? Are they ever giving me anything that I'm going, hey, oh, that's interesting, something's going on? No, I almost never.
Yeah.
Unless you get a character like Holebas, If you were familiar, he used to play for Watford. He played for Olympiacos and Roma, Jose Olebas, who will actually tell you, because he doesn't care. He'll tell you the truth and nothing but the truth, even
Yeah,
if it gets him in trouble. Like,
it's
but
good when
that's
you get a
fluent.
player like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I much prefer the insightful articles than you could do 100 player interviews. I'll probably get more out of the insightful article, to be honest.
There are exceptions to it, like I did an interview with Harry Toffolo recently that I personally found really interesting, because he was talking about his own mental health and how he went through this whole. I'm not sure if you're aware of it or not, but there was a whole betting scandal where he was found. He was charged with some historic betting offences that went back quite a few years to
Oh, wow.
a time when he was a very young player. And he spoke about how that affected him mentally and how it became a struggle for him to get through the challenges of thinking his career was going to be over. And it inspired him to help. He wanted to help other people with mental health struggles. So he joined forces with Forest to start. He joined in one of their existing mental health campaigns, and he goes to talk to Forest fans about their mental health and opens himself up to be somebody for them to talk to if they want. And I think that's just things like that are really unusual for footballers, and I find things like
Right.
that interesting. And that's what you want to talk to players about. You want to find out about them, what their interests are and what they're like as a human being, rather than why they aren't scoring from corners or why they can't keep a clean sheet. I like the human side of it.
Exactly. I would agree with you 100% there. Absolutely. Let's pivot the focus now a little bit to Forest in particular. So you talked about I guess the difference in your relationship now with the club since they got promoted, and I want to talk about your relationship with the club. You touched on this briefly. I think it was about a year ago, but I wanted to kind of elaborate more into it. Your relationship with the club since the takeover of Vagelis Marinakis, the owner of also Olympiacos. So was there an immediate change or difference in how things were managed socially between you and the club, or the people immediately changed? How did that materialize?
No, to begin with, there wasn't a change to the way. I don't think there was a change to the way the club was even staffed. Certainly not in terms of a media point of view. Not initially. So nothing really changed immediately. I think what you kind of appreciated from the start was that all of a sudden, not that the previous owners weren't ambitious, but Marinakis was somebody who, from day one, was somebody who wore his ambitions on his sleeve. He was very clear, and he kind of changed the dynamic at Forest from day one of him being the Nottingham Forest owner. He was bemused greatly initially by how some people would even celebrate a draw. Say they've got a good draw that equalised in the last minute. Fans will be pleased with that probably in some circumstances, and people at the club will be. But the mentality that Marinakis and his fellow Greeks and the new hierarchy came with was, you don't celebrate a draw. You haven't won. What are we doing? You want to be winning football matches, not celebrating draws. And I think that was kind of an example of the way that the mood was changed at Forest immediately. That there was this very demanding character who had very high expectations and wanted everybody to share that same will to win and that same frustration and disappointment and refusal to accept anything other than victory. That was it. I think that was the biggest change. I don't think there was much change in the day-to-day dynamic that you had as a journalist with the football club, but you could sense from people you spoke to at the club that there was a huge change in dynamic from the very start at the actual club and the mood and what was expected. So if you want to talk about change, that was probably the most significant one following the takeover.
That part actually doesn't surprise me, considering how Olympiacos is, and it's, if we don't win the title every year, it's a disappointment, regardless of what else happens.
That's probably a factor in it, though, isn't it? Because he's come from Greece, where the Olympiacos probably, well, almost certainly the biggest club in Greece, and there's expectations there for them to be winning the title every year. At Forest, it's probably slightly different. But what he's experienced at Olympiacos, he's probably brought with him to Nottingham. He's used to winning. He's used to expectations. He's used to fans probably being greatly disappointed if you're not challenging for the title every season. So he's come to Forest with this, he's used to a certain thing happening in Greece, and probably it's been difficult for him to perhaps adapt to not having high expectations once they've gone into the Premier League, where for the first few years, realistically, success meant staying in the Premier League.
Right.
He always wanted more. He talked about challenging for Europe, perhaps not now, but further down the line. That was his ambition. That's where he wanted to be. So probably an example of the mentality he brought to the club.
And it's something that mentality, at least as far as Olympiacos is concerned, it's not like it just developed because he owned Olympiacos. Marinakis and his family have been a part of Olympiacos for decades.
Yeah.
As it was explained to me by somebody that's that knows the family quite well, ownership of Olympiacos, managing Olympiacos is a family tradition, is how it was explained to me. Even though they didn't own the club outright for that long, I think they were minority owners at the time. But he grew up as a super fan of Olympiacos, and that's something that you see when he's there. I mean, he lives and breathes everything, and it's the same when you see him at Forest. Like he's not just an owner that's there to make money. He doesn't need a football club to make money. He has plenty of other businesses that he can do that with. But he becomes a super fan, and is that passion, that outward passion that he just wears on his sleeves, is that something that's a lot different than what kind of exists in ownership there in the UK?
Yes. I think that's another thing that he's I was going to say struggled to adapt to, but that's probably a bit strong. When I went to Athens, and I've seen, Forest have been to Athens a few times, and I've had the, good fortune to come out there and watch Forest play and go to the training ground and see what facilities Olympiacos have got. Got very warm welcome, very friendly people. And you could see that Marinakis, even from a short visit, you could see what a figurehead he was in the community, how he was kind of a patriarchal figure. He was heralded in the community. He was part of a much bigger thing. Olympiacos seemed to be an intrinsic part of the community in Athens, beyond a sporting arena. It's part of the fabric of the city. And I know that's what he wanted to bring to Nottingham to some degree as well. But it's different here. Fans don't see the owner of a football club in the same patriarchal way. They don't see him they don't herald the owner when teams are promoted necessarily. They will on a small scale, but it's the players and the manager and the people who deliver on the pitch that get the kudos largely for success. The owners will get some kudos for it, but not to the same degree as they perhaps would Olympiacos, where he's probably seen as somebody who's had a huge influence on what's good out there. So I think perhaps there's been it might have taken some time to adapt to how he's perhaps not viewed with quite the same level of respect or reverence as he might be in Athens.
Right. And also, to be fair, there's a huge cultural difference in Greece too, just in general. The football clubs in Greece, especially the big ones, if we're talking Panathinaikos, AEK, Olympiacos, Aris, and the top five, we'll say. PAOK, I forgot the last one. They are all ingrained into their communities, even politically. There's everything is connected in Greece in that way, and that's not really the case in the UK, is it? I mean, you don't have the political connection that's deeply ingrained into each football institution.
No, and it goes into the media as well, doesn't it? Like a lot of the football club owners own radio stations and newspapers.
They all do,
and probably have an influence on what goes out on that front as well. I know from personal experience that when I was at the Post, I think there was a conversation had with Marinakis because he wanted to buy the Post, because he wanted to have that much of an influence on it and replicate, what the situation he had in Greece. So yeah, the dynamic probably is very different for him over here, where you have an independent press who aren't influenced by football clubs to the same level on any means.
And then at the same time, you don't have the issue anymore, at least in the UK, to the level we do when it comes to the violence that we have related to football and sports. And it's been, we've had earlier this season, the AEK fan was murdered by a Croatian, one of the Nazi supporters, the Bad Blue Boys, that were allowed in and ferried in by Panathinaikos fans. Just from that rivalry side of things. So that's something that you guys haven't had since the crackdowns by, what was it? I believe it was Margaret Thatcher that started that crackdown on the sports violence. So that's all of these things that we have as a part of our culture just lead to so many different. It's just a different context related to the sport that is there.
But what fascinated me was the actual the ultras, like go even in a friendly game, just the fireworks, the noise, the passion, the sheer intensity, even in a friendly game, was absolutely incredible. I think I've still got the videos on my phone. It was a remarkable experience just watching a friendly game. I'd love to go back and see what it's like for an actual proper game, because if that was a taste of what it was like for a friendly against their sister club, then I'd love to imagine what it's like in a proper game.
Maybe you can convince the Athletic to let you go see Aston Villa, because it'll be nuts. The atmosphere, and right now, the way things have been going, that atmosphere that we've been used to, that kind of has slowly faded the last year and a half, or I'll say 2 years, maybe even 2.5, because of how things have been at the club. It's come back for the first time in a couple of years, and we have not just our fans, but we have boots on the ground in Greece. After the game, the game where we just beat PAOK, and a huge win for us for our title hopes, the fans were singing after the game. Everybody walking through the stadium, leaving, everybody was singing together, just as they were walking their different ways. That hasn't happened in a couple of years, and that atmosphere is finally coming back for Olympiacos, our castle, we call it, which is everything. It's the stadium itself, the atmosphere that the fans give. It was our strongest asset, and it's finally coming back. So that's something that, of course, everybody we hold very dear. We're very proud of, and sounds like it's a little bit different than most of the. I've never been to a Premier League stadium with a game going on, but I can hear usually through the TV. I can always hear the fans through my TV when I watch the games in Greece. I don't always hear them through it when I'm watching the games for the Premier League.
Do you know what? The City Ground has probably been. It's probably been a major factor in Forest's success in the last few years. The
very loud, a lot louder than the others.
Yeah, the atmosphere at the City Ground has been incredible. It's been. It wasn't just down to Steve Cooper, but it started during that era. He was very good at stoking that up with his fist pumping, and he was good at building a relationship with the fans, and he created, or he was part of this great spirit of unity and togetherness that literally drove Forest back into the Premier League and then kept them there last season. And this season, it's been a real. Even since they changed manager, the City Ground has remained a really noisy, passionate, vibrant place, and they're going to need that in the last 4 games as they look to stay up. But it's been a real strength for Forest. As you say, Olympiacos call it their castle. I guess Forest would say the same thing at the City Ground. It's been brilliant for them the last couple of years, and they need to keep that going. That's what's worrying, because without being over dramatic or too negative, if Forest were to get relegated and go back into the Championship, it just feels like it would be a step backwards in the journey, and they've just put season ticket prices up, which has gone down really badly. It just feels like perhaps the bubble might not have been burst, but it might have just had a pinprick in it, and it might be deflating a little bit, and it feels like the mood might change if they were to go down. So hopefully they'll stay up, and all that positivity that's been built up over the last few years can be maintained, and kept going again.
I hope so. We're coming up to about a half hour here, and I wanted to ask you kind of one last thing before we start to wrap things up.
Sure.
And it's about the reaction or the change in, I guess, the approach and the management of Olympiacos. So, especially when it came to Forest coming into the Premier League, you saw massive investment and change by Marinakis bringing in players, and even in the sophomore year for Forest right now in the Premier League, more changes, more players, and you have a glimpse also kind of how things are happen at Olympiacos too, where if things aren't going well, it's cut, next thing comes in, move on. Doesn't matter if it happens multiple times in a season, which he's been a lot more patient, I think, with Forest than he would have been if this were Olympiacos. How has that been since he became owner of Forest? How has that transition been, where you have somebody maybe that isn't as patient with certain projects as maybe other owners would, and is much quicker to bring things in, does business definitely a different way than a lot of people do in the Premier League, at least?
Do you know what? I think there was a expectation at Forest that was probably created by what we've witnessed at Olympiacos, where, as you say, you're probably not very shy about changing head coach every few months if it's needed. I think there were people around him, around Marinakis in Nottingham, who were probably trying to encourage him to keep faith with Steve Cooper for longer than he might have done. You know, there were moments where, even last season when they stayed up, there was a period around this time last year, actually, where Marinakis issued a statement that was broadly in support of Cooper. He was like, we call it a vote of confidence over here. But at the very end of this vote of confidence was a very stark message, which was just simply, results and performances need to improve immediately. And it was kind of like, well, he's given him a vote of confidence, but then said, if you don't, here's what's going to happen. You know, it was very, very blunt in its wording. But thankfully, he stuck with him. There was a game against Leeds where it was felt that they lost at Leeds, and I think it was a third or fourth defeat in a row. And the broad feeling was that Cooper was definitely going to go. There were people from the Forest hierarchy who were in the Elland Road boardroom at Leeds talking about Cooper being a dead man walking, and everybody expected he would get the sack that night, instead of which, I can't remember if it was the next day or the day after that, there was this statement put out saying they were going to keep the faith in him. So Marinakis has broadly been far more patient than you might have expected, given his background and previous habits at Olympiacos. He stuck with Cooper for plenty of time. I don't know. It's kind of strange because Forest have been on a poor run this season as well. But the whole situation with VAR and the incredible decisions that have been going against them, the whole profit and sustainability regulation, the 4 points they were deducted for those breaches, that's kind of become a distraction off the pitch as well as on it, because it's taken the spotlight off the fact that Forest have only won twice in this year. You know, they've not been brilliant, and that's not really been scrutinised very much because of everything else that's been going off. So I think Nuno Espirito Santo, probably to keep Forest up, he needs to win matches. But if he wants to have any job security this summer, I imagine he needs to do well in the next 4 games. Otherwise, he will, quickly come under scrutiny. If they go down, I think what will happen will be obvious. You know.
Oh yeah, of course he'll go there to comply with FSP or FFP. I forgot the term that the Premier League has for their set of CSR. I forget
PSR, profit and sustainability.
PSR, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. So you have to, in order to stay in compliance, he'll have to have a sell off, and then getting back into the Premier League will be the trial for the following season. But obviously, I always wish the best. I watch just about every game of Forest now ever since the promotion. So I hope that you guys stay up. I hope eventually you do compete for that European spot. For sure, he wants it. He wants more. He wants to eventually win a title.
I was going to say it'd be nice for the 2 clubs to meet in Europe. I think that'd create complications for him, wouldn't it?
Well, I think if they both make Europe, then technically somebody else has to stand in.
Yeah.
Isn't that the rule? You can't be the owner of 2 clubs in UEFA competition. So we'll see how that goes.
I'm sure that's a problem he'd like to have.
Oh, of course. And plus now with Rio Ave, he has his full, it's like his 80% ownership as of June in Rio Ave. And then, we'll see what happens with the Marinakis football group, I like to call it, how that works out. Well, Paul, thank you so much for your insight. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time. Do you mind just telling everybody where they can follow you?
At The Athletic, theathletic.com. It seems to be you can find us there, or you can find me on social media. I'm on X or Twitter or whatever it's called these days, at Nottam Tales, which is NOTTMTAILS. Yeah, they're the two main places to find me.
Absolutely. So you guys know where to follow him, and you can check him out.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, Paul. We appreciate it. And until next time, until the next meeting of Forest, where we're talking about transfers between Forest and Olympiacos again, because I'm sure we're going to be talking about that again this summer. So looking forward to that.